An epic psychic battle is about to go down as the leader of Claw literally declares war on the world. Greetings, my friends. It's time to take a look at another episode of Mob Psycho 100. I was so excited to watch this episode after the amazing cliffhanger last week where apparently Mob's parents and his brother Ritsu were burning alive inside of his house. And it left such an impact on the fan community behind this show. I think everybody had the same shocked reaction, and I was so anxious to see where the story is going to go, and officially at this point, it looks like Mob Psycho 100 is just turned into a full-on badass action anime series, but all still remembering what it is at its core, which is a coming-of-age story which is just sprinkled with all sorts of ridiculous comedy. And this episode right here just went full throttle as they introduce so many new characters with crazy psychic powers, and we get to see that a massive war is getting ready to go on with Claw. So let's just jump in right here. Spoiler warning if you have not watched this episode. Where do I even begin with this episode of Mob Psycho 100? There are so many things that went down, so many amazing action scenes, and the introduction of so many characters that I honestly just could not keep up with all of it. But at the end of the day, it's actually a pretty simple story. We get to return where Mob is getting ready to completely freak out over the supposed death of his parents. And of course, we get to learn from Dimple that maybe these aren't his parents. Maybe they were dummies that were simply planted there in order to sort of trick him. And he's able to sort of talk him down from his extreme anger, but he still manages to be at 100% of his power. And he actually senses that there were some psychics who were making their way to his house, and he's able to suddenly just jump immediately to them, and a big battle ensues. We have these two guys who just look fucking insane. This one dude who looks like a 1980s British rocker with the craziest hair that I've ever seen who has electrical powers, who of course ends up just getting completely demolished by Mob. There's also a business worker guy who's able to buff himself up with the power of his psychic powers, but Mob retaliates by just simply decking this dude in the face. It's really interesting because a lot of the times in the series, Mob just mostly uses his psychic powers, but you can tell that he's so pissed off at this point that he's actually kind of okay with using his fisticuffs, and I have to admit, it's actually pretty damned exciting. He really just wants to learn where his parents are and how all of this went down. And apparently these two psychics actually aren't the ones who kill his parents. In fact, they never actually arrived at the house, and they were sort of just on their way. In fact, the entire fire we get to learn was actually a very clever diversion, which was created by Sho. In the last episode, they made it seem like he was actually going to be attacking Ritsu and his family, but no, it was actually just a means of actually getting them to escape. I think they went a little far in actually lighting the place on fire. I mean, they know that this could have really messed with Mob in terms of how he, mentally freaks out over these type of things, but maybe they were just trying to draw out his power a little bit more. I don't know. I just think it was insane. But it is officially revealed, of course, that Mob's parents are just fine, and they're actually going to be hanging out at some sort of spa while all of this crazy shit is going on. Luckily, Mob is actually picked up by a couple of characters from the very first season, former members of Claw, such as Koyama and Sakurai. Sakurai in particular I thought was one of my favorite characters from the first season, mostly just because he's a badass psychic swordsman, but it's really cool to see former villains actually working along with Mob, even though he still sort of treats everybody like his personal bitch with his superpowered psychic abilities, quite literally making their car fly across the entire span of the entire city, where he meets up with pretty much every major psychic character from the first season as they form an alliance as they prepare to take on Claw. Mob is talked down by Dimple and Reagan, and he suddenly passes out from exhaustion, which sort of gives them an opportunity to relax. But of course, this relaxation is not going to last, as we get to see that Claw makes its big declaration that it's going to take over the world. They even so boldly go as far as to basically broadcast it to the entire world. The actual leader, Suzuki, decides to broadcast this to all of Japan, and basically says, we're going to use our psychic power to take over the world and to rule over all of the powerless people. This is also when we're rapidly introduced to so many characters, it's insane, such as some other members of the Scar group, we even get to see that there's also the personal attack guards of Suzuki, who are known as the Ultimate Five. As the name would imply, there are 5 members, and they all have very signature techniques, such as one big guy who can attack people with an umbrella, and even the guy who can actually, like, broadcast the entire message to all of Japan, because he can, like, hack into, like, electronic devices with his psychic powers. They're varied, they're ridiculous, and again, you can't judge a book by its cover. Even though these guys look like caricatures, they're all incredibly powerful. They even introduced this other brand new character who's like this psychic who's been hired by the government to infiltrate Claw, and he actually tries to attack the leader, and this is basically an excuse to see the Ultimate Five in action for the very first time. And again, the use of psychic powers here is really fun. I mean, they could just do the whole, like, battle of the mind thing, but these guys use their powers in a number of interesting ways, such as making their bodies incredibly muscular, or even this guy who can actually, like, utilize his cigarette smoke and transform it into, like, a concrete wall. It's really creative what they come up with here, and it's got me so excited to see what the battles are going to be like later on in the series. Also, really funny thing here, when Claw decides to make its declaration to the world that they're going to take over everything with their psychic powers, Mob and all of their group don't turn on the TV, so they have no idea any of this is happening. Again, the stakes are really high, but the series still manages to have a great sense of humor. I'd say the best introduction, though, is for a character who goes by the name of Shimazaki, another member of the Ultimate Five, who has the ability to teleport. He actually ends up having a battle with Teru at the very end of the episode, which is incredibly intense, and his teleportation is really unique. It's not just being able to go anywhere at once, but he can actually teleport inside the psychic barriers of people in order to have an extreme advantage against them. So for people who actually use those barriers, they're not going to be able to use this against this guy. He can totally exploit that weakness. He actually ends up, like, kidnapping this politician in order to use him as a hostage, and Teru decides to fight against him. And like I said, it's just so intense and crazy, and you kind of have to see it for yourself. So what's the rundown on this episode of Mob Psycho 100? I was, like, feeling drunk by the time I finished this episode. There were just so many crazy characters that they introduced, and the story itself just escalated in the craziest way possible. But I have to say, in terms of, like, the action, it was incredibly satisfying. All the stuff that they've been showing in the intro since the beginning of the second season is now going to come to fruition, and I'm so excited to see how that's all going to go down, especially by bringing in a lot of those other classic characters from the first season. Watching Mob now team up with his former enemies, I'm just so excited to see what they're going to do with the rest of this. I do feel a little betrayed, though, that the cliffhanger ending is not as dark as it initially was, but honestly, it kind of works for Mob Psycho 100. I mean, the last episode ended with what might be one of the most violent things we've seen from the franchise, and in the next episode, we find out that his parents are just hanging out in a day spa, and that is fucking hilarious. I really do love that. The show manages to raise the stakes, add in a lot of action, without still betraying what the entire Mob Psycho 100 series is all about, which is its comedic timing. But again, it manages to be stylistic and crazy, and like I said, I really do believe Mob Psycho 100 is going to go down as a cult anime classic just because of these elements and how well they actually weave together. It's just really great. And the absolute absurdity of Claw declaring war on the world is so insane, but it so works for this show right here. I will say, though, that I think that some of the introduction of so many characters at once was kind of sloppy, but again, it gives me an excuse to rewatch this episode, and that's exactly what you guys need to be doing if you're watching this series. Watch it over and over again. You're going to see things you never saw before, you're going to laugh, and of course you're going to enjoy that amazing action. I loved this episode. I'm giving it a 5 out of 5. I'd love to get your thoughts on the episode, and you can tell me all of them in the comment section below. Let's get a discussion going about this episode and the future arc of the series. I'll see you all next time, and as always, stay damn down, baby.